Hi, I'm so happy you've joined me for another video looking at reading a book with me. So let's get to it. The Tale of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle by Beatrix Potter, author of The Tale of Peter Rabbit. This is the sixth book in the series. If you want to see the previous five, then just look on the channel as we have a list of all of the books. For the real little Lucy of Newlands. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Lucy who lived at a farm called Littletown. She was a good little girl, only she was always looking for her pocket handkerchiefs. One day, little Lucy came into the farmyard crying. Oh, she did cry so. I've lost my pocket hankin, 3 hankins and a penny. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten? So obviously we know that crying is when you have tears and you're feeling really sad, but also when in speaking, if you cry out, it's if you shout or you scream out. And a penny is a little apron. The kitten went on washing her white paws, so Lucy asked a speckled hen, Sally Henny Penny, have you found 3 pocket handkins? But the speckled hen ran into a barn clucking, I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot. And then Lucy asked Cock Robin, sitting on a twig. Cock Robin looked sideways at Lucy with his bright black eye, and he flew over a stile and away. Lucy climbed upon the stile and looked up at the hill behind Littletown, a hill that goes up, up into the clouds as though it had no top. And a great way up the hillside, she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. So a stile is an arrangement of steps that allow people to climb over a fence or a wall. So if you go for a country walk, you might see a stile. Lucy scrambled up the hill as fast as her stout legs would carry her. She ran along a steep pathway, up and up, until Littletown was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. To scramble is to try to make your way up something quickly or awkwardly, especially if it might be steep, like this hill is steep. It's really difficult to climb up. And if you're stout, it means that you might be a heavier build, or it could be strong and thick as well. So that's stout. Presently she came to a spring bubbling out from the hillside. Someone had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup, and where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Lucy ran on and on. And I really like the picture with that little can we can see, which is overflowing with water. So there's so much water that it's brimming over as well. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were cloves, props cut from bracken stems, with lines of plaited rushes and a heap of tiny clothespins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else, a door, straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing, Lily white and clean-o, with little frills between-o, sweet and hot, red rusty spot, never here been seen-o. Lucy knocked once, twice, and interrupted the song. A little frightened voice called out, Who's that? Lucy opened the door, and what do you think there was inside the hill? A nice clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen, only the ceiling was so low that Lucy's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. So if you knock a door, it's when you hit the door just to let someone know that you're behind the door so that they can open it. So it's this sound. That's a knock, or to go knocking. And frightened, I think we've seen in previous books, but frightened means scared. And a flagged floor is a floor that's covered with large flat stones. There was a nice hot singy smell, and at the table with an iron in her hand stood a very stout, short person staring anxiously at Lucy. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her striped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, 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 and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and underneath her cap, where Lucy had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. If you singe something, it's that burnt, you can singe fabric, it's that burnt smell. And if this little person has prickles, can you guess what animal she might be? "Who are you?" said Lucy. "Have you seen my pocket handkins?" The little person made a bob curtsy. "Oh, yes, if you please, ma'am. My name is Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle." "Oh, yes, if you please, ma'am. I'm an excellent clear starcher." And she took something out of a clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. And you use starch when you do your washing or washing your clothes to make your clothes very straight, so you have no wrinkles in your clothes. "What's that thing?" said Lucy. "That's not my pocket handkin." "Oh, no, if you please, ma'am. That's a little scarlet waistcoat belonging to Cock Robin." And she ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. And you can see in the picture the iron that she's holding, that metal object with that pointy end. And if you play Monopoly ever, it's one of the items that you can use, the pieces that you can use. Then she took something out of a clothes horse. "That isn't my pinny," said Lucy. "Oh, no, if you please, ma'am. That's a damask tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. That's how it's stained with currant wine. It's very bad to wash," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And a clothes horse is what you put your clothes on to keep them dry or to dry them out after they've been in the washing machine or you wash them. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. And this, in the olden days, was how they used to iron clothes. They used to put it in the under the fire, so it used to get really hot, and you had to be very careful to move it because it's all metal and it gets really hot. Nowadays, we're lucky enough to have electricity and we can plug it into a wall, and it's much safer. "There's one of my pocket handkins," cried Lucy, "and there's my pinny." Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle ironed it and goffered it and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Lucy. To goffer something is to crimp the frills. Don't worry about the word because we don't see it that often, but it's very specific. So it means that when she ironed the dress, she made it very, very straight, the dress, and ironed it so it was neatly ironed. But then the frills, she enhanced them. She ironed them very specifically. She goffered them. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" "Oh, that's a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Henny Penny. Look how she's worn the heels out with scratching in the yard. She'll very soon go barefoot," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Why, there's another handkerchief, but it isn't mine. It's red." "Oh, no, if you please, ma'am. It belongs to old Mrs. Rabbit, and it did smell of onions. I had to wash it separately. I can't get out the smell." "There's another one of mine," said Lucy. What are those funny little white things? That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself. That's my last pocket hankin, said Lucy. And mittens are gloves as well. Gloves are what you put on your hands when it's really cold. And mittens don't have the fingers. So you just have one place for your thumb and then you have all connected together. So it's only two parts you have on a mitten, and gloves, obviously each finger has its own section. And what are you dipping into the basin of starch? They're little dicky shirts fronts belonging to Tom Titmouse, most terrible particular, said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Now I've finished my ironing, I'm going to air some clothes. What are those dear soft fluffy things, said Lucy. Oh, those are woolly coats belonging to the little lambs of Skelhill. Will their jackets take off? Asked Lucy. Oh, yes, if you please, ma'am. Look at the sheep mark on the shoulder, and there's one mark for Gatesgarth, and 3 that come from Littletown. They're always marked at washing, said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red tailcoat, with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin, and a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat, not marked, that had gone lost in the washing, and at last the basket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle made a tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Lucy. They sat down before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's hand, holding the teacup, was very, very brown and very, very wrinkly with the soap suds, and all through her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, so that Lucy didn't like to sit too near her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Lucy's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean pinny and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with turf, and came out and locked the door and hid the key under the doorsill. And turf is grass, so putting the turf on the fire means that it dampens the fire and it eventually will burn out as well, so very safe. Then away down the hill trotted Lucy and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle with the bundles of clothes. All the way down the path, little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met were Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny. And to trot is to walk at a fast pace, so to trot. And she gave them their nice clean clothes, and all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And obliged means to be grateful in this instance. Obliged can also mean you feel like you have to do something, you're morally bound to do something, but in this instance it means to be grateful. So they're thankful for her. So that at the bottom of the hill, when they came to the stile, there was nothing left to carry except Lucy's one little bundle. And a bundle is just a collection of things, or you can bundle something together, like bundle clothes up together if you're too lazy to fold them and put them away in your drawers. Lucy scrambled up the stile with the bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say good night and to thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running up the hill, and where was her white frilled cap, and her shawl, and her gown, and her petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown and covered with prickles. Why, Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Okay, and that's the end, and you can see the little picture of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle as well. I hope you enjoyed that, um, and I'm going to see you for the next book. And also, I hope you got some new vocabulary words as well from this. And see you next time.